I'm Matt Donato. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Alumni Career Services here at the university, and I welcome you to our Uncommon Core session, How to Win Friends and Influence Your Career, the importance of career networking. I know networking is a term that you hear a lot, especially if you've been in a career transition or you're in a career transition. It almost seems cliched, but it is a really, really important skill, and I intentionally say it's a skill that you need to be good at in today's world, especially in a competitive job market. You need to be good at it. So we have an excellent panel that will talk about networking experiences and share some insights with you from their professional and maybe personal lives as well. And I'm going to ask the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. By way of introduction for myself, I mentioned I manage alumni career services here at the university. I've been here for about 7 years, working in various offices from fundraising to the undergraduate career office, now to managing alumni career services. If you got the handout at the front of the door, we have bios for all of our panelists, as well as some information about accessing the Alumni Careers Network on our Alumni and Friends web community. So I encourage you all to go create your career profiles after the event if you haven't already, and join the network of close to 15,000 alumni who are ready to share their professional insights and be advocates for everyone in the alumni community. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Liz to introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Matt. I'm Liz Stefanski. I'm the senior member of the panel. I graduated with my PhD in '74, and I thought I was going to be a biologist and cure cancer, but that didn't quite work out, and I wound up having a kind of a zigzag career path, which is detailed on the sheet, so I won't repeat it. But I've actually been associated with the University of Chicago in some capacity for most of my career, because is this enough? Okay. The University of Chicago actually operates Argonne National Laboratory, where I spent most of my career, but the fact that I got a job at Argonne had absolutely nothing to do with my having graduated from this university. So that's it in a nutshell.
Are they back on? Yeah. Hi, my name is Paul Kaufman. If you have any trouble hearing me, just wave, or any of us just wave, and then we'll yell. I'm an attorney in Philadelphia. I work for the federal government. I do a little bit of prosecution work. I do a little bit of defense work, and I do a little bit of civil prosecution work. And my career path was it was pretty typical, I think, of young lawyers coming straight through. I graduated here. I went to law school, graduated law school, clerked for a judge, worked for a firm for a little while, and then they gave me a chance to do what I really wanted to do, and that's what I'm doing right now.
I'm Alexandra Skoulas. I got my bachelor's in '79, almost as vintaged as yours. And I currently do change management for Chase Bank, and that means trying to anticipate what the impacts are of various changes on our clients and employees, and then preparing them for that change. I got there. This is actually my third time working for the bank in one form or another, and I have done some other things in between. I've been an options trader as well as a consultant.
Hi, I'm John Cunin. I got my master's here in '94 and have really, since then, really been working just at nonprofits. I'm right now at IFF and the Chief Administrative Officer, and have been there about 6 years. So.
Thank you. So we had a fifth panelist who's on the sheet, and he unfortunately got sick this weekend, so couldn't be with us and sent his apologies. That's Brad Henderson, who's actually the first name on your panel bio list. But what I'd like to do is I'll ask a couple questions to the panel and ask anyone who has some thoughts on them to weigh in. But I really want to spend the minimal time of me asking questions and want to really turn things over to all of you in the audience, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions or things that you might like to, ideas that you might like to share with the panelists. So I'd like this to be a dialogue, but I sort of want to kick the panel off, and maybe we'll start down with you, John. In your career, how many of your jobs were attained primarily through networking versus, sort of applying to a job through the newspaper or through online postings? And how has networking been an important tool in your professional life?
Yeah, I think really there's one job I know that I just applied for kind of blindly out of the jobs I've had. It's otherwise, in some way or another, I have had to do some networking to get a job, whether it's I knew somebody at the place I was applying to or knew somebody that, someone a friend of a friend or some way along the line. So it really has been a very important part of being able to get a job and also just to learn about other options that are out there. May not even turn into a job, but just to figure out what other people are doing to see if that that they're doing is of interest.
Similar experience. My first job was the only job I applied for in the traditional sense, and then every other move has been a result of knowing somebody, and it's particularly common in consulting practices for entire entourages of people to kind of move together. So I'd say way more networking than the traditional path.
I think I've probably more than anybody else on the panel have had a hybrid. Almost all of the jobs that I've gotten I've formally gotten through a formal application process that's very typical. It begins with a letter, but in each case I've tried to do some form of networking or getting a contact or some other way in to assist with that. So I think I've used networking more as a plus factor than I have really followed anyone or followed a particular group or gotten a contact because of that. But in each case, I'm reasonably confident that one of the reasons that I got the job that I got was because I worked through back channels to make sure that either my resume was seen by the right people or that it came with the right kind of gold star seal of approval or whatever else.
I calculated I've had about 6 different jobs in my career, and one of them I got by sending in an application. The others were all networking, generally with people that I knew from where I was working at the time, or in one case a previous job. So it's been very important in my career too. I also find that networking is important because you have to maintain relationships with other organizations regardless of who you work for. It's invaluable to know people in other organizations, and the interactions that you have with them are unpredictable but generally very positive and enhance whatever you're doing.
So something that you mentioned, Paul, it made me think of something. So you've applied to a lot of jobs, but then you've also tried to network your way in once you've submitted an application. So, if you're doing something by email or phone to make a networking contact with someone you might not know, or doing some research to find someone, what's the most effective way to get people to respond to you in an email or a phone call? Like, how have you had success getting people to respond when you've been applying to positions?
It's actually been extremely rare for me, and I apologize for not being able to answer the question based on a little bit more knowledge. It's been rare for me to actually do it that way. Okay. Generally, what I've found most effective for me, and I have a very small sample size, certainly relative to my co-panelists, has been I make a contact with a person I know who knows a person, or I make a contact with a person directly through some other means, and we can talk more about that later. Some of them may be law specific, a lot of them are not. And then I use that contact as my entree rather than making a cold email or a cold call. And sometimes that involves like a lukewarm call. Hi, I'm Paul Kaufman. I'm the guy that Liz Stefanski told you about. Would you mind talking, kind of thing. But I always try to have someone, right, exactly, a personal hook, someone who a person can do a favor for by talking to me, and then I hope to go from there, and I've found that to be pretty effective.
Alexandra, did you have anything?
No, I would say that the number of altruists I've met in my life is slim. So I feel that there has to be a connection of some kind to get a meaningful helping hand. I think there's a huge difference between what somebody will do for you if they don't know you, and what they will do for you if they either know you or someone who they know has vouched for you in some meaningful way. So I too couldn't answer a question how to get a total stranger
And I think
other than to offer money.
Yeah, and and I think that's one thing that when I talk to alumni about the Alumni Careers Network, you are sort of making a lot of cold, calls or cold emails, but there is sort of this shared connection that's warmer than maybe finding a random person on LinkedIn or Facebook, because you both went to the U of C, whether you went to college, at different times, whether you went to college or someone else went to the law school, there's still that connection that you can capitalize on, and it maybe makes someone more likely to respond. I know I didn't go to Chicago, I went to Georgetown, but when people contact me through my Georgetown Careers Network, I respond all the time. Because I value that connection with the university, and I know that person has a shared experience with me, and I was maybe in their shoes 7 or 8 years ago, and someone responded to me through my someone responded to a request I made through the Georgetown Careers Network would help me get my job here at the university. So that's a powerful connection that you can take advantage of by using the Careers Network. Did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say I've done the same thing where it's that saying, if I know somebody who was in the policy school after me, or I went to University of Wisconsin undergrad, though that kind of connection, if you can talk about having that, making that slim connection that you went to the same school, that at least can get, I listen to that, and I think other people listen to that too.
And by the way, just to put in a plug for LinkedIn, LinkedIn has a platform where you can sign up to be a member of a group, and every college has its group. So I made some good networking contacts actually through the LinkedIn University of Chicago doorway, and also my undergraduate university similarly. So that's a feature of LinkedIn that maybe not everybody is aware of.
And we have we have a number of University of Chicago groups. We have our Alumni Career Services group, which is just under 1,000 members. We have the University of Chicago Alumni Group, which is right now at about 6,800 members. My office manages both of those groups. And there's also a large Booth alumni group out there, which I think is 7 or almost 8,000 members. So there are these big communities of alumni on LinkedIn. And if, for the first two that I mentioned, anyone is welcome. For the Booth group, you do have to, I think, be a Booth alum, but I think they do let other people in as well sometimes. So check them out, request membership, and chances are you'll get in, and then you'll have access to another couple thousand or more people. And I'd like to open it up. So I saw a hand go up in the back. Let me bring the microphone to you so that everyone can hear you. I'll do my Jerry Springer impression.
Please not.
We don't
have
I
won't
fight,
do it that way.
John's a lot bigger than I am.
Connection that you mentioned.
The Alumni Careers Network. Yeah, we have an Alumni Careers Network. We have 2 LinkedIn groups. Yep, and we also have a Booth LinkedIn group. Yeah. Oh, that's a good. What's the one? Oh, University of Chicago Business Women in Business. Okay. Oh, great. That's awesome. If you can talk loud, you don't have to wait for the mic. I need my exercise, though.
Hi, my name is Afi Scruggs, and I have a very specific question. How do you use networking to overcome isms, sexism, racism, and ageism?
Any takers?
Well, I'll say something about ageism. I found a very useful contact by, playing around with the search capabilities of LinkedIn to find a person who was an alum of both my undergraduate and my graduate universities. And he happened to be in his mid-70s, but he was still active professionally, and he was, more than happy to talk to me. And I'm 62. He didn't seem to think that was a big barrier to my, talking to him and finding another job.
I think part of the trick, and this may not be addressing your question, at least from the direction that you'd intended, but for some folks, the ageism is working in the opposite direction, at least for some of our younger alums. And when I was applying for jobs for which I was not yet entirely qualified or could rightly be seen not to be entirely qualified. What I did again was I would try to get to a not formal meeting with people before you get there. Try to get sitting across the table, sharing a hoagie with somebody, even if they're not of your race, ethnicity, gender, or age. And if you're impressive in person to that person, your connections around that are going to be skipping that layer. You'll have gotten across the table from somebody. Now, if somebody is so ist, whatever the ist is, they won't even sit down with you. I mean, obviously, that's probably going to be a huge problem. But I think in today's business climate, you very rarely will find that. And then if you get across the table from them, you have the opportunity to impress them. And if you're successful, then you jump that barrier. And if you're not, then you've probably hurt yourself more. But it's a risk-reward play.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to remember is networking is about building relationships. And you're not a piece of paper. You're not, whatever your, age, gender, ethnicity, whatever is on a piece of paper when you're across the table from someone. You are building a relationship with them. And you're also trying to build an advocacy relationship in some ways. You want to come across as professional. You want to come across as a prepared person. And you want the person who you just met or maybe you got introduced to by someone else to want to advocate for you by the end of the conversation or by the end of a series of conversations because they know you, they're looking beyond, the color of your skin or your gender, and they're seeing that, wow, this person has some skills, whether they're 72 or whether they're, 22. And they could be an asset to someone, some organization, and I'm going to, be an advocate for this person. If I see a job, I'll recommend, them to apply, or I'll forward them on. I'll put their resume to the top of a pile if I'm in that position. So I think networking is a huge opportunity to overcome isms, and I think we're also trying to build in ways for our alumni community to come together around different identities. So we have these new Chicago affinity groups that are gathering around shared identities and shared interests. We have industry networking groups that are forming around things like law, bio, life sciences, financial services. We also have shared identity groups that are forming. The LGBT alumni group has been very active this weekend and has done a lot of stuff with the alumni weekend. We have a UChicago, University of Chicago Association of Black Alumni group that's forming to, allow these connections to form and to also, provide a place where people that have shared interests or shared identities can gather, can network with each other, and can be advocates for each other and build a stronger alumni community from all directions. So I think that's definitely something that networking can help overcome isms, and we're really, as a university, trying to build an opportunity to create those very specific networks as well. Any other comment? Any other questions? Yeah. So the question for anyone who didn't hear it is the university education sort of having that on your resume sort of part of the secret handshake, you're part of the club, or does the education sort of help you in a more objective sense? And are you a better candidate? Are you a better...
I think it does help. That having University of Chicago on your resume does open some doors. People do respect it as an institution and respect the people that come out of here. I remember just one of my old roommates when I was deciding where to go to graduate school said, if you go there, you'll always have that on your resume, and that says a lot about you, and that can open doors. And I think that's true. I look at a lot of resumes as part of the work that I do, and if there's somebody from University of Chicago, I kind of
sort them to the top.
Well, I take note. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's relative to whom and for what. I think if you are comparing the University of Chicago to the people and institutions that we would call our peer institutions, or we would not deign to call our peer institutions, but the rest of the world might rightly think are our peer institutions, that there will be a factor, but it's really a factor principally in the mind of people who went to the University of Chicago and have that particular view. I have, and on at least one or two occasions, gotten one of those sort of blind emails from somebody who's a University of Chicago person, or run into a University of Chicago person at one of our local alumni events who needed a job and for whom I was willing to vouch in a more substantial way because I believe in the quality of education here than I would somebody else. But, you know, if you're in a position of getting in a University of Chicago versus a, you know, insert your name here, you know who we're talking about, I don't know that it catapults you either positively or brands you with a scarlet N. I'm not sure it goes either way.
You know, I think it depends a lot on who is making the judgments. If your resume is being reviewed by an HR director from, you know, generic university, and it's not for a very high-level position, it might not make that much difference. I think it's, you know, the context in which you're being judged is a very big part of whether it matters or not.
I would say it diminishes in importance with time. I think what you do after you leave U of C begins to matter a lot more, and where it may play a role is in two very junior people who might have, you know, otherwise similar resumes, but after a certain amount of time, I feel it's academic.
I think in terms of networking, one of the things that we do try to do, and our volunteers out in cities around the country are looking to do more of this, is to partner some of their efforts with other schools' alumni groups in those areas. So I think in some ways, being from the University of Chicago, while it may sort of diminish in importance in the job search, I think the fact that we have the name also helps open doors to do co-events with other, you know, top tier peer type institutions. Yeah, I mean, I know in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Alumni Club has done events with the Stanford Alumni Club. I know the Booth Club out there has done events with the Stanford Business School Club. So I think the fact that you sort of, as a university, we are, you know, at a certain tier with other peer institutions, that does create opportunities to expand networking beyond just the University of Chicago alumni group. And it's not, we're still moving towards that, but I think there is definitely some momentum in that area. So if that sort of gets to what you were asking, I think it does have value just beyond the secret handshake in some ways. Other questions from the audience? So how can you use networking in some ways to expand your horizons in both circumstances? And I know we talked about that earlier this week. So I'll let you guys take a first stab at answering.
Once a public policy person, always a public policy? Or not?
No, I don't think you have to be. I mean, I think one way maybe I mean, it is some networking, but to use that to try to even in a cover letter or something, talk about how you can, those same skills that you say heavy background in educational policy, how some of those same skills might be able to be used in transportation policy, or, you know, how some of those things are definitely transferable. Looking at data, whatever it is, and try to de-emphasize the educational piece of it and re-emphasize the policy side of it. Maybe you've done some of this, but I think that's one way to try to start working on that way. You know, maybe even in, you know, I read a lot of cover letters, and they mean a lot, and so to me at least. And so if you can identify in your cover letter, particularly why that job is interested to you, what the specific skills are, though maybe your resume doesn't show it, how you think they can be transferable, that can make a difference, I think.
I am going to take a slightly different approach to your question, because I am a believer that working, even if it's not in your chosen field, is an important thing on a number of levels. I think that self-esteem is at the top of the list, even higher than income. And if you take the pressure off by being engaged in something, even if it's not exactly what you want to do, that allows you to have kind of renewed energy and the financial comfort as well, to keep plugging away in the area that you are interested in. that's a controversial approach. Some people believe that you absolutely need to stick, to your field and not deviate. But I personally have been a concierge. I have, while I was coming to the realization that I would never really be a good options trader, I took other jobs to kind of just take, as I said, take the edge off, be disciplined, have to show up someplace. And I was lucky in the case of the concierge job to be able to have hours that still allowed me to be available for interviews during the week. So, my advice for both of you would be to try to get working, and then from that base, try to get back into the direction that you really want to go.
Another aspect of that is that in spite of all we've said about networking through affinity groups and so on, when you're working at anything, you're in a much better position to find people to network with, right, to get to where you want to be.
Let me just respond very briefly on the law point, because it's actually a field I actually know something about, and so I want to talk while I have actual knowledge. Law is a train wreck right now. The entire industry was based on a model that I think people at this institution would have studied and said, "What the devil are you thinking?" It was a nonsense model that has come crashing down. In Philadelphia, we lost a 110-year-old firm, just shut its doors. Firm that had been around forever, was one of the only firms that would hire Jews before 1970. It was the Jewish firm in the city, just gone overnight. 300 lawyers on the streets. We've had every big firm in the city, and law is a weird profession in that it's a chauvinistic profession in the sense that there is this sort of path that is expected. One goes to become an associate, then one can become either an associate or a partner or an in-house counsel. And there's this sort of weirdness to it. And I think we're at the beginning of a reconstruction of the legal industry model that may not bear fruit for you or for my wife, who's in a very similar position, having graduated law school also in 2007, and in the same exact position of sort of not being able to get purchase anywhere because there is this flood of people who are big firm associates who are now on the streets and have that big firm associate credential. I think I would approach it. The nice thing about a law degree is you don't need somebody sitting next to you to work in your field. You've passed a bar, you are a lawyer, so you can do some legal work, and sometimes that legal work will lead you to new and interesting areas. You can sort of build a network through hanging out a shingle, and it's almost the only profession in which that is true. That's the best advice I can give, other than, and this is, if I can take a moment to take the question, let me do the University of Chicago thing. Let me respond to the question you've asked with the answer I wanted to give, whether or not the two are connected. And that is, we talk about networking as an instrumental act. Okay, here's how I'm going to meet this person, I'm going to meet that person. I actually think that that's probably the least effective of the forms of networking. What I have found has been effective for me in my own limited world, which may have greater application in certain industries than others, is the networks that I have built are from doing what I love to do anyway.
Natural networks.
Natural networks. I was a high school mock trialer. I love high school mock trial. In order to do high school mock trial, I became a member of the Young Lawyers Division of the Bar Association. Through that, I also began teaching civics in classrooms. And during the period that I was in private practice, all of the business that I brought in from parents of kids who I was coaching, some of whom were lawyers, some of whom were not. And it was a natural network for me. It was a passion of mine. And I think there are two components to that. Number one is find whatever your passion is and do that. Because, naturally the networks are going to meet people who are like you because they're having the same passion. And the second thing is, and this is especially true for younger alums, I think, than older ones, the person who does the scut work wins. In a very perverse way. In any volunteer-based institution, the big problem is getting somebody to actually turn those great ideas into something. Everybody gets together, we want to do this. Who is going to write the curriculum? Who's going to sit down and pound out that work? who's going to sit down and write the mock trial case, in my case, who is going to be the person who actually sends out the 450 emails. The work that frankly is lousy. But if you do that work, people remember that you're the one who did that work. And they, out of some sense of gratitude to you, will generally make sure you're not generally the first person up on the podium accepting the congratulations, but they'll always make sure you're the next person up, because they recognize that you were the one who bent your back and did the work. And for young alums especially, that is the best advice I can give, because people do not forget that. And it gives you an opportunity. If you do a really, really exemplary job, people are going to look at that work product and be like, wow, this is just a mock trial case, but boy, this is a mock trial case, or whatever it is that impresses them.
I think that the kind of referral and introduction that you get from someone who has seen your work, whether it's in a volunteer capacity, it can be, organizing the bake sale. It is far easier to get a meaningful introduction from somebody who knows that their reputational capital is not at risk, because they are recommending, and they can be, the more specific that they can be, this is a highly organized person, this is somebody who can, do X, Y, and Z, then they make you a much more tangible quantity or entity to the person that they're telling about you. And I think you're right, Paul. You have to earn it.
And that comes full circle with a lot that we talk about at Alumni Weekend. All of the things that we share in well, not me necessarily, but you as alumni. I went to Georgetown, so but it's a way of thinking. It's a skill set that you build through the rigor of the curriculum, regardless of whether you went to the Harris School or the college or the SSA or business school. There's a rigor there and skills that you develop that are marketable across a variety of things. You had another comment.
It's tougher. It's bad. It's interesting because we think of industries as having a bad time, and they certainly are, and law is a mess right now. But there's sort of compensatory swings that happen, and after the bloodbath of late 07 through 08 in law, we had a little blip of hiring in early 09. And the people who had not lost faith or who had built these networks or whatever it was that distinguished them, and obviously for each person it was a different thing, were able in many cases to find a little breathing room. Often not at the same salaries and the same things that had been before, but there was some space. And I know, for example, that the government, which I work for, at least the federal government, is back doing more hiring than it was 2 years ago. It's not hiring a ton, and it's hiring in weird places and in pockets. But for example, if you were looking to be an attorney doing fraud work, this is a great time to be doing fraud work. There's a lot of fraud, and there was before, but now we're hiring for it, and we're hiring for mortgage fraud. And I know, for example, from talking to somebody last night, just a classmate of mine who works in mortgage foreclosure practice, well, they're foreclosing all over the place. They need lawyers left and right to run their foreclosure practice, because if you screw it up, it's very bad and you wind up getting hammered. And so, and it may well be that you have absolutely no interest in that. And I respect and respect the choice not to go into it. But there are niches that develop as the plates shift. Then I would say, and paralegals, by the way, is one of the areas, if you're in the law, where networking is most potent. Because the skills necessary to be a paralegal are very ill-defined. There are sort of professional paralegals who go through a paralegal training course, and they're very efficient, and they know how to do very specific things, and they do them very well. But that there's also a mass of people who are called and paid as paralegals and as legal secretaries who are just college students or college graduates. There's a lot of flexibility in the definition of the term paralegal. And so that's an area in which I would definitely work my alumni connections. The one or two jobs that I've actually been able to actively get for people were for people who, someone came to me and knew some very obscure Central Asian languages that they'd learned at the University of Chicago in classic University of Chicago fashion, had then graduated not having any real plan for what to do with those obscure Asian languages. And I happen to know another University of Chicago graduate for whom I was an OAID here, who's an immigration paralegal. And I said, hey, maybe you want to talk to her. And it turned out that there was, in the immigration industry, some use for that particular subset of obscure Asian languages that worked out great for that particular person. Now, it's going to obviously depend a lot on what your skill set is coming in, but that's an area in which, because the job is ill-defined, and the responsibilities are ill-defined, the outputs and inputs are both relatively ill-defined for paralegals. It's an area in which that can be effective.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'll go on.
Yeah,
I was going to say, my wife actually is a paralegal. Well, she was. She had a degree in Russian, kind of that same path. And
resting ground for linguistics.
But it's interesting. I mean, she came in because there was a huge case where they basically kind of needed warm bodies, as she describes it. Unfortunately, I mean, she got laid off in February. She was 23 years at the same law firm. Wow. And so that also is just happening. I mean, the flip side is she has seen movement of people saying they're looking for legal assistance here and there. I mean, I think that is an area you should explore. She is not ready to go back and do that again right now. So there are some other paralegals at her same firm that got laid off that are also not looking to do it. So now's your chance to maybe go do that. Yeah, I mean, it happens everywhere.
And many lawyers as well. And that's an industry in which they haven't.
They said, oh, we need a paralegal, but JD required.
Yeah, right.
That's not a paralegal.
But it's being paid as a paralegal. I think you had a question.
I have strong opinions. Didn't even let you finish the question about recommendations that are solicited for LinkedIn. I tell anybody who asks me that if they have a specific job, or that either they are applying for a job or they are consultants trying to land a client, that I will I will give a recommendation that is specific, not a blanket, oh, Paul's a good guy. He did great on something I did, because it's meaningless to me to see a recommendation that has no context that I can relate to. It's something I won't do, but for people who I would give a recommendation for, I absolutely tell them, go ahead and give my name to somebody so that I can speak to exactly how you would, help them either as an applicant, because I can speak to specific qualities that you have. That doesn't come across on LinkedIn, and I don't like that aspect of it because it makes it seem way too Facebooky. And I think that LinkedIn should be used for making the connection, but not the recommendation. I feel very strongly that I would rather talk to the person, because frankly, I don't know. I can gather something about the person on the other end of the line and draw some conclusions that I cannot just from seeing a statement that, as you said, could just be a trade. I'll recommend you if you recommend me. So not knowing where it came from, it still doesn't change my mind, but I've spoken enough about it. I'll let my colleagues.
Perhaps oddly, for somebody who I guess represents more of the internet generation up here, I find those things completely useless. I would give no particular weight to anything on them, except maybe if someone got a truly terrible review. Because I think that there is a lot of trading, there is a fair amount of fraud, and when I'm writing a recommendation for someone that I know will be publicly available, I'm much more circumspect. Whereas, to me, I mean, the currency of my profession, quite literally, in most cases, is time. We bill our time. But I think that the currency of our society, in a great deal, in a very significant way, is time. if you are willing to put in time to talk to me, the mere fact that you have chosen to spend your time that way makes a great deal of difference to me. The fact that you're willing to spend even 10 minutes on the phone with me talking about how great, Liz or whoever is in the field makes a great deal of difference to me. And yes, you can gauge by talking to them. Do they really mean it? Or does the word great mean, yeah, they're great? There's a lot that you gauge. But for me, I think LinkedIn and Facebook and the other social media are great ways to get to the point where you might get somebody to make a phone call for you. But I wouldn't put any particular weight in a LinkedIn or any kind of online media.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about the alumni community, I know through the Alumni Careers Network, through our alumni directory, you can find a lot of that contact information for past classmates. You can search by class year, degree, things like that. So some of that information may be available to you just by virtue of being an alum and being able to connect with other alumni. LinkedIn is a little more of a arm's length, I should say, transaction where you have to ask someone to be connected with you in most cases, and then once you are connected, then you could sort of exchange messages that way, but there's really no direct phone number or email address that you get just through virtue of going on that site and looking at it. You could Google people. Absent subscribing to research database that has people's phone numbers and email addresses collected. I think I've done that a lot to find alumni that I know we have bad contact information for that I've wanted to reach. I Google them, and usually within 4 or 5 clicks, I can find at least an email address or a company phone number, and you can maybe get through the voicemail tree to find someone who does pick up the phone eventually. But it is a little challenging. You do have to sort of approach it creatively, and unless you want to subscribe to a service, which I don't know that I'd frankly recommend, it could be a little difficult. But make sure you're utilizing all the tools, whether it's the Careers Network, the directory, other tools that are available to you that you can utilize right away.
I think the question was also directed to how to make the call.
Yeah, right.
And for me, at least, it varies greatly depending on, and this is going to, of course, come across as ageist, but depending on the generation of the person I'm calling. If I'm calling somebody who is considerably senior to me, who's been practicing in the field for a much longer period of time, who is statistically less likely to be emailing back in 45 seconds than somebody of my generation, we have ADD out the wazoo. Email, okay, I'll just fire off a text message back again or whatever. Generally for those folks, I'll try to make a phone call first, or I'll try to send a letter first. For somebody of my generation, it'll be an email to lead with, because I think in my generation, we're very comfortable with that, and I'm very comfortable. I'm much more comfortable if you want to ask me about jobs advice for you to email me, and then to set up a time via email to have a chat, or to do it through some kind of instant communication device that doesn't require me at that exact moment to pick up the phone and now talk to you, because I might be in the middle of something. But if you email me, it's very easy. I think that may be a generation gap, or it may just be something I'm perceiving as a generation gap. No, I'm not certain that that's true. I take your point, but I'm not certain that it's true that we need to be on the same page. I think that the critical thing is no, and I don't think that that's. If I had a much senior attorney call me, I would understand immediately that is the mechanism, the primary mechanism of communication for in the way that person was trained, raised, brought up, and works, is to pick up the phone. The primary method of communication for me, in the way that I was trained, raised, and everything else, was email. Beginning at the University of Chicago and thenceforth.
I'm probably more of an email person than a phone, only because I spend a lot of time on the phone during my work day. So it would be rare to just lob in a call and actually get an answer. So I agree that using email for all of its, inobtrusiveness is probably the best way to get the ball rolling. But I also think that people shouldn't feel obliged to kind of wait X amount of time. If you don't get an answer right away, I think you can send another email after a few days, not be snotty about it. But I think probably after your third attempt to reach somebody, then I think you know it's a dead end. But I think it's absolutely okay not to sort of sit on your hands and wait. I do not find a second email if I haven't responded to something a negative thing. The person now really does want to talk to me.
Well, one source, they do have access, but you have to log in person at the CAPS office, so they do share it, but it's limited. It actually is a product that my team has looked into investing in. We do provide, free access to vault.com, which is more, industry research and career guides. It's good, but not perfect. OneSource is a very hardcore research tool on all kinds of organizations, for-profit and non-profit. And so it is something that we're looking into, possibly investing in, or maybe sharing the subscription cost with Booth.
So sorry. They have five special licenses that they'll allow us to do.
And we have,
totally, 4 times a year or something like that. So you can have it for a week in your own home.
Right, because not everyone can log in at the same time. It's very, I've heard about how it works.
It's out of any of the tools I've ever used, it really is the best.
That's good to know. Thank you.
And it's available to people who work at companies like me, where somebody else is paying the subscription, but it is available as well. Another reason.
You had another comment?
I would, if in a situation where I had just finished something that I was pleased with and I knew my client was pleased, I would ask them for a real live referral. I would say, now that I have done this for you, who do you know, who can I help? And I would want to get something that I could use from
to develop new business, but
right.
I think the only last thing I would say, not to get caught up on this, is I agree with both of you. Actually, I think you guys are sort of agreeing as well in some ways. But the only thing that I would say, in my experience with LinkedIn recommendations, I hired someone, and in the process of checking her out a year or two ago, looked at her LinkedIn page, tried to look at her Facebook page. And she had a LinkedIn recommendation, and it was the first time I had seen that. So I read it, and I said, oh, that's interesting. But in no way was it the basis of the decision. I still called all of her references. I still, wanted to talk to actual people who were her managers. The thing that caught my attention with the LinkedIn reference was it was her manager that left the reference. So that's sort of the similar situation with a client. So it was sort of saying, oh, well, her manager or someone she worked for endorsed her. That's cool. It makes me think of her maybe in a different light, which gets to your point. If you hear enough positive things about someone, you're probably going to start off thinking more positively about them. But still, that wasn't at all the basis of, I hired her anyway, but, it wasn't the basis of the decision. That's a good question. How do you sort of build a relationship and not make it a one-way street where you feel like you're taking? How do you not burn out your networking contacts as well? Any thoughts?
Well, my networking successes have mostly been with people that I really knew, that I had worked with in some capacity, not necessarily professionally, it could be in a volunteer capacity. And I find that if somebody knew me, they didn't think it was exploitative. They thought it was a normal kind of request. I think if I were going to the next level of trying to get very tangible help from people I really didn't know, I don't know the answer to that question. I think it would be, is a very fine line between seeming exploitive and not. I think the key is just knowing the person or having somebody that you know in common with them, so that you're not Joe off the street.
I mean, I think
exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
You said it well.
It's a challenge. I mean, I think bad networking hurts you. If I feel like someone is coming to me magically, is suddenly all of a sudden my friend who never talked to me before in their lives, and frankly, that's happened to me a lot in the last couple of years. The job that I got is a job that a lot of people want. it's a safe harbor in a legal profession that's a mess. And if you were very nice to me when I was at a firm and I worked with you and you split work with me and everything else, I know that that's legit. And if all of a sudden now I'm someone you want to talk to and you never wanted to talk to me before, well, I'm going to notice that. I'm no fool. I hope. But I do think that there's a natural hesitation not to want to impose, and that's a good hesitation. But a long time ago, my folks said to me, some of the most powerful words in the English language are, could you do me a favor? Most people as long as it's not, could you do me a favor? Now I need 36 hours of your time. I want you to run my job search for me, but could you do me a favor? Could you be my recommender? Could you do me a favor? Could you call this guy and let him know that I'm for real? If you do a light touch with it, and if it's somebody with whom you have a legitimate relationship that predated all of a sudden, now you need something from me, then even if I recognize that now you're coming to me because you need something from me, that's different. And if I've worked with you and everything else before, it's going to make a difference than if all of a sudden you're treating me completely differently this week than you treated me last week.
I think the asker has to do homework and come prepared, not expecting the askee to do a lot of the homework. And the more specific you can be, like, I saw this particular article that referenced your company, that's why I'm calling you. Or I saw this job posting, it's a legitimate posting. What can you tell me about the job that maybe isn't posted? Those kinds of requests are met very differently from somebody who says, my niece is looking for a job. What's available?
I think a lot of it does come down to it's building a relationship, which I said before, but it comes down to having that specific request and having maybe a non-threatening request, not, hey, can I meet with you? I need a job. But hey, I'm thinking of making a career transition into this position. I wanted to ask you, how I could position myself best to do that. And sort of having more of a conversation, having a specific ask so that someone feels comfortable responding. You might send them an email or give them a quick phone message and say, would you meet with me to talk about this? It's much easier for someone to say, oh, sure, I can talk about that, than to say, I need a job, can you help me? And I'd be a little scared.
And on that, right, and on that point, maybe it's just because I read a lot of Tom Clancy as a kid, but business intelligence is very powerful. When people call me who know me, I'll tell almost anyone what I know about our hiring process. I will walk almost anyone who's a friend of a friend of a friend through the hiring process. I'll tell them what the general nature of the questions are likely to be, and that's proved true for me when I've asked other people.
And that's really useful info.
And it's gold. I mean, you don't need me to get you a job, but if I can tell you, here are 2 questions you're going to get, and they're going to be the first 2. Boy, that's handy to know. You like to have those answers down right, and that's information I'll share with everybody. Now, there's a very, very small group of people whom I would call my boss and say, I know this person is coming in. You should know this person's top flight, because I know that I expect, I hope that it's going to have a meaningful impact. And if I'm going to I'm putting my entire credibility with my boss if I do that kind of a call for someone. So that kind of call I'm going to be very unlikely to give. But if you're just a friend of a friend of a friend, I got your name from this guy, I'm coming in to interview down in your office tomorrow. Would you mind taking a couple minutes and just telling me about the process? That I'll do. And that can be worth just as much, well, not quite just as much to you, but it can be very, very, very powerful for you.
It's a big confidence builder.
Absolutely. It's a confidence builder. You come in and you have the opportunity to do the first couple things that you do right. And maybe and this is something that I strongly recommend to the extent that you know somebody in the building who can serve as your informer, if you can find out who's going to be doing your interview the day before or 2 days before, call them up and you say, you call up the person's secretary, whoever you've been talking to. I was just wondering, do you know who will be doing the interview? We leave immense electronic footprints. It is staggering the amount of information that you can find about people. When I interviewed at my office, I didn't get any useful information from my office or from its website, but the people who I was interviewing with had been asked by industry associations to speak on topics, and as part of that, those people had collected resumes for a conference. Well, gosh darn it, now I know every school that the person went to, where his first 4 jobs were, what the first 3 things that he did at those jobs were, in very summary form, and any articles that person's written that I can then look up. And, maybe that turns out to be really useful information. Maybe it turns out to be completely useless information. But I'd rather have the choice than not.
I've done it. I mean, I used to work in consulting and finance as my description. And when I left my job in finance, I was unemployed for at least 3 or 4 months. And during that time, I knew I didn't want to go back to finance, but I knew I wanted to do something in higher ed. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know how my skills translated into that. So I started networking. I used my, like I said, Georgetown Alumni Career Network, their version of it. I talked with, friends in the city who I used to work with at the bank and I had good relationships with, and they passed me on to people that they knew. And those conversations were very, and sort of getting back to your point, very non-threatening. They were very informational based. I wasn't asking for jobs. I wasn't even asking for a lead. But I would approach it very professionally, where I prepared myself. I did my research. If I found out, if someone took a meeting with me, I would sort of do what you did. I would go online. At that time, it was not as much information online, but I would go and look for as much as I could. I'd research their organization, find out what they were doing, what their role is at the organization, and come in very prepared and professional. And that really led to a lot of productive, these are the skills that you've developed, and here's how you could apply them in what I do, or in this career path. And oh, by the way, I know someone else who works over here. Why don't you go talk to them? And so I get another lead from that. And I had a series of really productive conversations and built this network of people, some of whom I still keep in touch with. But it took a while. It didn't take a week. It didn't take a month. In some cases, I was doing the networking even after I got my job. But it was good to have this level of networking contacts who I continued to keep in touch with. So there's a long-term aspect to it too, where it's not, okay, one call, I get what I need, and then I'm done with you, see you later. You can't do that, or you can, and you're going to burn out your network very quickly. But it's definitely a long-term thing. And I had good success sort of finding people through my school's network, through my personal network of friends and acquaintances who led me to sources of information that were helpful. I don't know if any of you had that similar or different experiences. I think we might have time for one more question. And sorry.
Well, one thing that I might add to your answer was that it can be very helpful to join a professional organization, even if you may not think the people in that organization do exactly what you are interested in learning more about. It's a real gold mine of learning about what a lot of other people do and, how they apply their skills to a particular kind of career. That was very helpful to me earlier in my career.
And volunteer for organizations that you're passionate about. I think Paul talked about that. But volunteer, especially if you're in a career transition, you may have some time on your hands. Use that time to make connections within organizations, to be a doer at an organization and to get noticed. A lot of nonprofit organizations need lots of help. They often have boards of directors who are, in different well-placed positions, and if you make connections with those people, there's opportunity to learn about what they do and to maybe learn about where opportunities are in different types of organizations, for-profit or nonprofit.
Speaking from nonprofit, the one thing you really should try to find something that you're interested in, though. You can't be pretty obvious that you just want to volunteer because you think you might be able to get a job. So you need to go to a place, because we do get a lot of calls from people, I want to volunteer, and we don't really need a lot of volunteers. We're a nonprofit, but we are not a direct service organization. There are thousands of different, not thousands, there are many types of nonprofits, and you really need to know about that nonprofit before you go and ask to volunteer or do something, because they very well may not need your need your help. So
and
it's
you
just,
have,
again,
yeah.
gets back to the information, doing your research, and knowing some about that.
And you have to be open to opportunities too. You have to be social about
Right.
it. I mean, for the first time recently, I did a volunteer experience at the Greater Chicago Food Depository, and you're packing cereal into a box, standing next to dozens of people. Strike up a conversation with people and find out. Ask them why are you here? What do you do? And you find that just by being a social person, which I know the stereotype for University of Chicago maybe is anathema to that, but I know. I'm sorry. I actually think that is a myth more than a stereotype. But I think, if you can talk with people, if you can have a conversation, if you can sort of, strike up an interesting dialogue, you will find that there are people out there that can be helpful to you no matter what your experience is, what the volunteer experience you're doing is. And you have to be open to it. I think that's the big thing. And take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself.
There was a question.
Yeah, there was a question.
Maybe a good transition to the breakouts.
Yeah, I mean, and the one thing I'd say, do you work with people on the OIG side now then? Okay. Well, are there people that you work with professionally who you could have a conversation with, to sort of, what Paul was getting to, what's the process? What's it like? How do you get in on that side and get some inside information? And I think, maybe because you're employed and you're just looking to make a switch to something else, maybe that, I don't know if that lessens the sense of panic or a sense of, feeling like, oh, they can see in my face, like that I'm really wanting this. Like, I think maybe take comfort in that, but also say I have an opportunity based on what I do now to find people and connect with people who might have inside information. I don't know. I think it is time to sort of go in the breakout, and I'd be happy to talk, or I'm sure some of the panelists would be happy to talk more. I guess if we want to sort of disperse to the four corners, that's fine. Maybe just the four corners, like here in the aisle here and over here. But thank you all for coming. I'll be available. Really enjoyed, talking with all of you. And please note on your sheet, on the back side of the sheet that we gave away at the front, there's some information about career resources here that you should check out online. And if you have other questions about Alumni Career Services, my direct contact information, email and phone is on here. Be happy to talk with anyone. But thank you.